My name is Rafael Testa. I'm a research associate of the Center for Logic, Epistemology, and the History of Science at University of Campinas, CLE-Unicamp here in Brazil. I think that the big picture of my work can be described as a study of rationality. Broadly speaking, rationality implies the conformity of one's beliefs with one's reasons to believe, and of one's actions with one's reasons for action. But what exactly does it mean to change one's belief in a rational way? In this presentation, I will introduce a formal model of belief, or to be more precise, a formal model of belief change, and try to shed some light in the later question. But first, let me talk a little bit about myself and my background. I am a philosopher with a work that involves the application of mathematical logic to particular problems in a philosophically motivated way. On the other hand, and taking the research I developed in my master's and PhD thesis, it can be said that I am a logician whose research has philosophical inspiration and, if I may say so, whose research has philosophical consequences. Not surprisingly, most of my research is about paraconsistency and paraconsistent logics. The reasons for that are the original works of Newton da Costa, followed by his pupils and collaborators that are part of CLE's history. Simply put, their interests include the development of systems strong enough to encompass most of mathematics, while avoiding some well-known logical paradoxes. In my PhD thesis, supervised by Marcelo Conilho in collaboration with Márcio Ribeiro, we advanced a novel epistemic interpretation to paraconsistent logics. In that work, and most of my subsequent works, paraconsistency is studied from the perspective of epistemic attitudes of acceptance and rejection. Broadly speaking, and from the perspective of belief dynamics, the acceptance of a belief representing sentency, namely a new piece of information, is not a sufficient condition for retracting its negation from a given epistemic state. As we understand it, such unnecessary retraction hurts the rationality principle of informational economy, a feature that I call as the cost of consistency. In those works, we follow the route of the so-called logics of formal inconsistency, advanced by João Marcos and Walter Carnielli, in order to generalize and extend da Costa's works. The logics of formal inconsistency, further studied by Carnielli, Conilho, and Marcos in the Harmonian paper, internalize the notion of consistency in order to control the explosion principle. Such a strategy gives rise to a new consistency operator, or its duo, the inconsistency operator, captured by us by the new epistemic attitudes of strong acceptance and strong rejection. The details can be found in the reference. The fact is that, as we understand it, the role of belief dynamics in the study of the phenomenon of paraconsistency is central, and I believe that it was indeed already present in several systems of paraconsistent logic, tacitly or explicitly, like in the dialogical approach to paraconsistency. Looking back at my career, I think that that's the origin of my interest in the area of belief change. Again, my connections with the AGN system of belief revision should not come as a surprise, since my PhD supervisor and then my postdoc advisors, Marcelo Conilho and Eduardo Fermé, were both pupils of Carlos Alchurron in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I had the privilege to work with both, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to spend 1 year working with the Madeira Group for Knowledge of Representation and Reasoning at the University of Madeira in Funchal, the capital of Portugal's autonomous region of Madeira, where Eduardo organized the BRAON, Madeira Workshop on Belief Revision, Argumentation, Ontologies and Norms, since 2012. The lively discussions held in both editions I had the opportunity to attend are the responsible for growing my interest in the area, and arguably most of the results and research questions I am still working on are thanks to that experience. Well, I hope to contribute a little bit in popularizing the area of belief revision with this video. Thank you, Gabriele and Maria, for inviting me to contribute with this project, Lógica MX. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Belief revision is a research area in formal philosophy that makes use of logic to produce models of how human and artificial agents change their beliefs in response to new information. The properties of these models are investigated in order to improve our understanding of how beliefs can be changed, with a particular emphasis on what it means to change one's belief in a rational way. To better understand it, consider the following example. An autonomous robot has a map of the environment that surrounds it. On that map, there's nothing in front of it, so it can move straight. Suppose now that the robot's sensors detect a large object in front of it. How should the robot react? Should it doubt the sensors and continue trying to move straight ahead? Or should it believe in its sensor and doubt the map? In order to reason about the real world, intelligent systems, like our autonomous robot here, must have ways of dealing with incomplete and inconsistent information, including those comes from different sources. These issues are addressed, for example, in the study of nonmonotonic reasoning, truth maintenance systems, and database update, just to name a few. Belief revision is a formal approach that relates all those areas. Let us consider another example. Suppose that a database contains the following information. All European swans are white. The bird caught in the trap is a swan. The bird caught in the trap comes from Sweden. Sweden is part of Europe. From the set of proposition, it can be deduced that the bird caught in the trap is white. Now, suppose that the bird caught is black. If you simply add the new information to the database, it will become inconsistent. If it's intended that the database remains consistent, how should we behave? Should we keep those data ignoring the new information? Or should we add the new information to the database, removing some of the beliefs contained in the original database? In this case, should all the beliefs be retracted, or just some of them? But which ones? I think that most of you would agree with me that in order to consistently accommodate the new information that the bird in the trap is black, it doesn't seem rational to retract the fact that Sweden is part of Europe. Instead, for instance, retracting the belief that all European swans are white. This means that there are some kind of extra-logical factors when choosing in what to believe, or in that case, in choosing what to retract. These extra-logical factors are part of what we usually call as rationality principles, or rationality criteria. If we wish to preserve consistency, then the some subset of the original database in the previous example must be discarded, or even the new information or part of it has to be rejected. As I mentioned before, the information about European swans could be wrong, but so could be my previous geographical knowledge about Europe. Finally, the information about the feathered color could be wrong. By the way, is that really a swan? Any of these options, either individually or combined, allows us to solve the problem about the incompatibility among the original beliefs and the new information. Thus, it's possible to formally define an operation that takes a set and a sentence and combines them into a new consistent set. That new set includes parts, or even the whole, of the beliefs in the original set alongside the new belief representing sentence, if we are willing to accept it. And that operation, the so-called revision operation, can thus be expressed as a consistent subset of the outcome of the simple straight addition, but now considering two basic notions, consistency and the selection among the possible logical ways to perform the change. And these notions consistency preservation, and preference-based selection are two of the main rationality criteria that I've mentioned before. There are some other ways that a set of beliefs can be changed, as we shall see. In order to model these operations, two distinct approaches are usually followed. On the one hand, these operations can be characterized by identifying properties that they are naturally expected to satisfy, the so-called postulates. On the other hand, these operations can be presented by explicit constructed methods. In fact, usually these distinct approaches are complementary. Studies and belief revision conciliate them by providing a constructive method for defining change operators and, at the same time, providing a set of postulates that exactly characterize the class of such operators. The results of the univocal identification between an explicit construction and a set of postulates is called representation theorem, which importance is improving our understanding of both the constructions and the postulates. One of the main contributions to the study of belief change is the so-called AGM model, named after the initial of the authors, Hansson, Gardenfors, and Mackinson, proposed in their paper on the logic of theory change, partial mid-contraction and revision functions. As it is highlighted by Fermé and Hansson, many research papers have been called seminal, but few deserves that designation as much as this article in the Journal of Symbolic Logic. The reason for this lasting impact is that it provided a simple input-output framework for modeling change, with potential applications to a wide range of important areas. It may be useful in cognitive psychology for the development of models of learning and mental processes. It may be useful in the development of economic models by providing a formal representation of the change in beliefs of economic agents. It may help legal theorists in the development of models of change in legal systems. It may be useful to practical computing by providing tools that allow us to revise database in a rational and efficient way. By combining logical tools with representations of choice in an innovative way, the AGM model of belief revision has been extensively studied and has developed rapidly and in many directions, not only influenced by, but also contributing to two main distinct areas, philosophy and computer science. Regarding to philosophy, it can be said that four authors had a big influence in the beginnings of the area. The first one is George Henry von Wright, who laid the foundations of the logic of beliefs, which was considerably developed and extended by the second author of our list, Jaakko Hintikka, regarded as the founder of formal epistemic logic and of game semantics for logic. The third scholar of great influence is William Harper, who pointed out that Carnap's inductive logic does not allow us to revise previously accepted evidence and created a model to accommodate rational conceptual change. Finally, Isaac Levi, who provided much of the basic formal framework of belief change in his seminal paper, Subjunctives, Dispositions, and Chances, and other subsequent works. All these authors and works deserve a video for their own. What I want to tackle here is how belief revision has been influenced by several research traditions and reciprocally shed new lights on philosophical issues that was already discussed long before the introduction of formal models of belief revision. The same can be said about influences and impact in computer science. Since the beginning of computing, programmers have developed several procedures for database updating, and more sophisticated models were inspired by the development of artificial intelligence, including the truth maintenance system developed by John Doyle. In this direction, other significant theoretical contribution was a paper by Fagin, Ullman, and Vardy, in which they introduced the notion of database priorities. The principles exposed by those works were very similar to those expressed by the AGM trio for belief states. In this video, the focus is to advance a brief introduction to the AGM model, highlighting the connection with some other ways of modeling the dynamics of beliefs, as well as connections with other areas. Hansson and Hansson cooperated in studies of changes in legal codes, analyzing the logical general principles involved in removing a norm from a legal code, a derogation. The key idea was that, given a code, a partial order on the norms of that code could be created to induce an order on the set of parts of it. The maximal sets that did not imply the norm to be removed were called remainders. Later, they extended the horizon of the problem, arguing that it was not limited only to sets of norms. That very procedure was thus applied to deal with arbitrary formulas, not only norms. With respect to Gardenfors, his early works were influenced by Levi and Harper. He advanced a semantic account of epistemic conditionals based on belief states and belief changes, by defining a set of postulates that change functions must satisfy. It was the combination of those works that gave rise to the model I will introduce in this video. In most models of belief change, including AGM, beliefs are represented by sentence in some formal language. Thus, the beliefs held by an agent are represented by a set of such belief-representing sentences. It is usually assumed that these so-called belief sets, also known as epistemic states or theories, are closed under logical consequence. This is so because, as it's explained by Levi, a belief set consists of the sentence that someone is committed to believe, not those that they actually do believe. It's worth mentioning that, of course, we could consider distinct other ways for modeling the epistemic state of an agent. We could, for instance, represent it as a probabilistic measure defined over some object language or over some space of events. Even, we could consider sets of possible worlds, among others. Such models can provide more fine-grained representations of belief change. However, they also make the model more complex. The research strategy followed by the AGM trio is to advance a simpler, more idealized propositional model, from which it is possible to expand it to something more complex according to the phenomena to be addressed. Now, since we are dealing with a sentential model, there are three epistemic attitudes to be considered regarding a given belief representing sentence, let's say alpha, with respect to a certain epistemic state kappa. Acceptance, when the sentence belongs to the belief set. Rejection, when the negation belongs to the belief set. And indetermination, when neither the sentence nor its negation belongs to the belief set. Then, given a new piece of information, changes in the epistemic state are triggered, transforming the original epistemic state of an agent into a new epistemic state. There are 6 possible changes of epistemic attitudes towards a sentence, from indeterminate to accepted, from indeterminate to rejected, from accepted to rejected, from rejected to accepted, from accepted to indeterminate, and from rejected to indeterminate. These 6 possible changes of epistemic attitudes towards a sentence can be identified with 3 operations that we consider in the AGM model. Expansion, the addition to a belief set of a sentence that does not contradict it. Revision, the addition to a belief set of a sentence that contradicts it. Thus, in order to retain consistency, some previous beliefs have to be removed. And contraction, the removal of a sentence from a belief set without introducing its negation. As I've mentioned in the beginning of this video, there are certain rationality criteria that these operations are expected to satisfy. For instance, consistency, which states that, if possible, the new epistemic state should be consistent. Preference, that is, beliefs that are considered more important or more entrenched should be kept in favor of the less important ones. Closure states that the logical consequence of the beliefs that are accepted in epistemic state should also be accepted by it. Information economy, or minimal change, states that the new epistemic state should retain as much as possible of the previous state, and primacy of the new information, that is, the new information should always be accepted. These criteria, among others, are present in the meta-level of the models, and of course, not all of them are desirable at all times. In distinct models of belief change, distinct priority over these criteria and distinct interpretations are given. I'll back to this point later. What is important now is to perceive how these extra-logical elements are applied in performing the operations of expansion, contraction, and revision. This can be easily perceived by the postulates that characterize them. In the Asian model, expansion satisfies the following postulates. The first one is a formal representation of the closure criterion. The second postulate, success, states that a sentence is always incorporated in the outcome of an expansion, given the primacy of the new information. Postulate 3, inclusion, says that the expanded belief set contains all the sentence of the original belief set, so that no information is removed when performing an expansion. Postulate 4, vacuity, states that if we expand a belief set by a sentence that already belongs to it, then the expansion is innocuous, that is, it is vacuous. Postulate 5, monotony, states that if a belief set contains at least the same sentence as another one, then the expansion by a given sentence alpha should contain at least the same sentence of the expansion of the other belief set by that sentence alpha. Finally, postulate 6, minimality, assures that the outcome of an expansion does not contain more sentences than those that are needed to jointly fulfill the other 5 postulates. It can be noted that these postulates characterize a simple set-theoretic union, defined by Levi as a two-step procedure. The sentence is added to the belief set, and then the resulting set is closed by logical consequence. The other operators, however, cannot be easily constructed as expansion, since their postulates do not determine unique contractions and revisions for the belief set, but rather they only provide properties that these operators of change should satisfy. For contraction, the most basic postulates are the following. As in expansion, the closure assures that the outcome of a contraction is always a belief set. Inclusion states that no new sentences are added to the original set as a result of a contraction, while vacuity assures that nothing is removed when contracting a belief set by a sentence that is not an element of that belief set. The success postulate states that if a sentence is not a tautology, then it is not an element of the outcome of the contraction of the belief set by it. As an expression of the principle of minimal change, recovery states that if the result of contracting a belief set by a center sentence is subsequently expanded by that same sentence, then all the initial sentences are recovered. Extensionality states that the contraction of a belief set by a logical equivalent sentence produces the same output. In addition to these 6 basic postulates for contraction, Alschuhn, Gardenfors, and Maxson also presented auxiliary postulates to state some specific constraints to contraction by conjunctions. Conjunctive overlap states that all the sentences that are in kappa contracted by alpha and also in kappa contracted by beta must be also in kappa contracted by the conjunction of both alpha and beta. Conjunctive inclusion states that if alpha does not belong to the contraction of a belief set by the conjunction of alpha and beta, then everything that is removed when contracting that belief set by alpha is also removed when contracting it by the conjunction of alpha and beta. The postulates for revision follow about the same pattern for contraction, Recall that the revision is the incorporation of a new sentence in which some previous belief may be retracted in order to preserve consistency of the resulting belief set. The basic postulates for revision are the following. Closure assures that the outcome of a revision is always a belief set. Success states that the sentence by which the belief set is revised is an element of the revised belief set. Inclusion assures that what is added to the revision of a belief set by kappa by some belief representing alpha is at most the consequences of kappa expanded by alpha that are not in kappa. Vacuity says that if the negation of a sentence is not in belief set kappa, then the revision of kappa by that sentence contains the expansion of kappa by such sentence. Consistency states that the revision of a belief set by a consistent sentence is itself consistent. Extensionality states that the revision of a belief set by logical equivalent sentences produce the same output. As in contraction, there are two other postulates to deal with the revision by conjunctions. Superexpansion states that the outcome of the revision of a belief set kappa by a conjunction is contained in the expansion of kappa revised by one of the conjuncts, by the other conjunct. Subexpansion states that if the outcome of the revision of kappa by a conjunction does not contain kappa revised by one of the conjuncts expanded by the other conjunct, then revision of kappa by the first conjunct contains the negation of the other conjunct. By the very definition of revision, it can be noted that both operations, contraction and revision, are interdefinable. Revision by alpha can be accomplished by first contracting the belief set by the negation of alpha, and then expanding its outcome by that sentence. That's the so-called Levi identity. On the other hand, if revision is considered the most basic or primitive operator, then contraction can be defined by revision. The contraction of kappa by alpha can be defined as those beliefs from kappa that are kept when revising it by not alpha. That's the so-called Harper identity. In the Asian model, contraction is regarded as a primitive operation. We just saw the postulates that characterize it. Now, let's turn our attention to the explicit construction. My focus in this video will be the so-called partial mid-contraction, based on the concept of remainder set, that is, the set of maximal subsets that fails to imply a given sentence, following the works of Auscheron and Maxson, as I've mentioned before. Formally, the definition of the remainder set of A with respect to alpha, or better, A remainder alpha, is a set of sets such that B belongs to A remainder alpha if and only if B is a subset of A. B does not entail alpha, and B is the maximal subset of A that does not entail such alpha. Then, a selection function gamma is used to pick out a non-empty subset of kappa remainder alpha if it is non-empty. On the other hand, if the remainder is empty, then the output of the selection function is kappa itself. Intuitively, such selection function is expected to pick those elements that are held in high regard by the agent. In order to formalize such intuition, it can be introduced an explicit preference relation or ordering of entrenchment on such maximal subsets of kappa. In this case, such selection function is called relational. Furthermore, this function is transitively relational if and only if such relation is also transitive. Finally, we can define a construction for contraction in terms of a partial mid-contraction, obtained by intersecting the elements chosen by the selection function. Such contraction is transitively relational if and only if it can be generated from a transitively relational selection function. As I've mentioned before, a representation theorem is the result of the univocal identification between an explicit contraction and a set of postulates. Regarding the present-tense construction, we have that a contraction is a partial mid-contraction if and only if It satisfies closure, success, inclusion, vacuity, recovered, and distensionality. If it is a relational partial mid-contraction, then it also satisfies conjunctive overlap. Furthermore, it is a transitively relational partial mid-contraction if and only if it also satisfies both conjunctive overlap and conjunctive inclusion. Now, given the mentioned Levi identity, a construction for revision is straightforward. That is, it's given by a contraction by not alpha, followed by an expansion by alpha. The revision is said to be partial mid-revision if and only if the related contraction is a partial mid-contraction. As expected, the revision is said to be a transitively relational partial mid-revision if and only if the related contraction is a transitively relational partial mid-contraction. Recall the example about the black swan in the trap. In order to consistently accommodate the new information that the bird in the trap is black, some previous belief should be retracted, since by closure the jointly entail that the bird in the trap is white. So, alongside the fact that the bird in the trap is not black, other beliefs should also be retracted, namely those that jointly entail that the bird in the trap is not black. Some candidates for remainders in this example are the sets that does not contain at least one of the previous beliefs. Thus, a remainder could be a subset that does not contain the belief that all European swans are white, or the subset that does not contain the bird caught in the trap is a swan. Indeed, in order to guarantee a maximal subset that does not contain the sentence, the bird in the trap is not black, it's necessary and sufficient to retract exactly one of the previous belief representing sentences. And that's when the selection function comes into play, in order to choose one of those remainders, either generally defined or explicitly formalized by a preference relations on such maximal subsets, in the case of relational partial mid-contractions. Following this example, and from the definition of revision, we can perceive the close connection between non-monotonic reasoning and belief revision. For instance, let A be some background beliefs. If we say that beta belongs to A revised by alpha, it means that from the new piece of information alpha, we infer beta, giving such background belief A. When considering such A as a fixed and consistent belief set, it's possible to advance a translation between the two frameworks. Beta is inferred from alpha if and only if beta is in the revision of such fixed background belief set by alpha. Of course, the details of such relation is not that simple, and a lot remains to be explored. But translations like those contribute to our understanding of both fields of research and allow us a cross-fertilization of ideas between them. The same can be said regarding the distinct ways revision operations can be presented. I'd like to sketch here one of them, the possible world models. The details of defining possible worlds are beyond the scope of this presentation. For general purposes, it can be said that a possible world is a consistent subset of the language, and the sentence can be identified by a set of possible worlds, namely those worlds where that sentence is true. Thus, there is a one-to-one correspondence between belief sets and sets of possible worlds. The set of kappa worlds is the set of all possible worlds that contain the belief set kappa, and the set of alpha worlds is the set of all possible worlds that contain the sentence alpha. One of the major advantages of possible worlds is that they can be represented graphically in a very intuitive way. The rectangular space represents the set of all possible worlds, while each possible world is represented by a point in that rectangle. Thus, each proposition, accordingly, each set of possible worlds, is a sub-area of the rectangle. In this diagram, the smaller a belief set is, the bigger is its representation. Thus, tautologies are represented by the whole square, while contradictions are represented by the empty set, since they are not subset of any possible world. Expansion is the set of worlds that are both kappa worlds and alpha worlds. The contraction of kappa by alpha is represented by an addition of some not alpha worlds to the set of kappa worlds. The selection of those not alpha worlds are given by a selection function constructed in a not dissimilar way that was made by partial mid-contractions. Of course, taking appropriate considerations regarding the specificity of each characterization. I will not give the details here. Again, they can be found in the references. What is interesting for us to focus here is that revision is defined following the Levi identity. Revision, thus, is given by the intersection of a selection on the subsets of the set of the alpha worlds. As expected, the class of possible worlds-based contraction and revision coincides with the class of the AGM operations, and forcibly there is a mapping between the former with the partial mid-contraction. In order to also capture the supplementary postulates and thus to provide the mapping between possible worlds-based operators and transitively relational partial mid-contraction and revision, a more sophisticated construction is necessary. As advanced by Grove, it's possible to define an ordering over the possible worlds where the set of kappa worlds is the innermost sphere. Figuratively, the distance between a possible world and an innermost sphere reflects its plausibility towards the set of kappa worlds. The closer a possible world is, the more plausible it is. The selection function, thus, is constructed in such a way that the outcome of the transitively relational partial mid-revision of a belief set kappa by a sentence alpha is the theory determined by the set of the most plausible alpha worlds. As I mentioned, the Asian model inspired many researchers to advance generalization, extensions, refinements, and connection with other research fields. An overview on such system is given by Fermé and Hansson in this book, Belief Change, Introduction and Overview. One of these alternative models is belief-based dynamics. Instead of belief sets, a belief base is a set of sentences that is not closed under logical consequences, except as a limiting case. One of the fundamental properties of belief base is that it can distinguish between explicit beliefs, namely an element of the base, and implicit beliefs, namely the logical consequences of explicit beliefs. Other significant property is that belief bases make possible to distinguish between different inconsistent belief states. Thus, distinct operators can be defined. Among those, it's possible to define revision by a reversed Levi identity. That is, a revision of a belief base A by alpha can be defined as an expansion of A by alpha, followed by a contraction of not alpha. Furthermore, since inconsistent belief bases do not explode into trivialization, it's possible to define an operation that clings the consistent belief states. In terms of partial mid-functions, this operation, called consolidation, is defined as the intersection of the most preferred maximal consistent subsets of a belief state. From consolidation, it's also possible to define a non-prioritized belief revision in which the new piece of information is not necessarily accepted. This operation, called semi-revision, is defined as an expansion followed by a consolidation. The choice among such distinct models, including their justifications, include a discussion, as said before, about the very rationality criteria that underlie such constructions. Indeed, and on the other hand, such constructions can help us to identify what does it mean to change one belief in a rational way. Of course, rationality itself has several distinct specialized meanings in philosophy, economics, psychology, artificial intelligence, and other areas. Furthermore, even when one specific epistemic meaning is considered regarding the dynamics of belief, there is no consensus about dealing with such concepts probabilistically, decision theoretically, logically, or computationally. The Asian model of belief change can be understood as a point of entry to such discussions, given its simplicity and, as explained, the possibility of generalization, refinement, and extension, alongside the fact that it's not bounded by a specific language. Well, I hope this video helps to show why belief revision can still be considered as a flourishing field of research and a bridge between several other disciplines in philosophy and computer science. You can find in the description of this video not only the references but also a list of suggested introductory and systematic readings about the subject. Thank you for watching, and again, thank you Gabriele and Maria for inviting me. Long live Lógica MX project. Ciao.